The attitude that you've taken to the idea of subjectivity, this is what I want to bring into question in some way. I'm thinking of papers like, the main paper I have in mind is the paper called The Myth of Subjectivity, and the title is suggestive of the attitude. Now, I have to make it clear, I don't want to resurrect or defend the thing that I take you to be attacking. Right? You're attacking, and it's very explicit in the paper, a Cartesian conception of subjectivity. That's what the myth is. Subjectivity as, in some peculiarly radical way, inner, and I don't know, prior to our take on our subjectivity, prior to our take on anything else, which generates this awful seeming problem of how we can claw our way out from being in touch with our own subjectivity to being in touch with what before we started doing philosophy we surely rightly took ourselves to be in touch with. That's fine. It's surely right that should be scotched, that conception of subjectivity. But now at the end of that paper, I think you say, well, all right, we can save something from the wreckage and call it the idea of subjectivity if we like. It's going to have two properties, this residual idea. And I'm not sure I can remember what the what the two are, having started to catalogue it. Some sort of first-person privilege, not absolute. And an asymmetry, I guess. Those are really quite close together.
They are.
That's all. That's all that's left of the idea of subjectivity. Now, I hear a remark like that by you as leaving the idea of subjectivity as close as it can be to the Cartesian conception. So it's blips in consciousness that don't have anything in particular to do with our being in touch with the objectively real stuff that we're in touch with. Saying, well, you can have some of that. It's not going to be nearly as, central in your picture of things as the philosophers who thought that philosophy had to organize itself around the clawing yourself out thought. I'm bothered about this. It smacks to me of something like throwing out a baby with some bathwater. This very dismissive attitude to the very idea of subjectivity. Again, I'd like to keep the constitutive ideal of rationality in play, and to suggest that there's a rather robust, it isn't to be dismissed in the way that you do at the end of that paper, rather robust conception of subjectivity, of a kind of authentically Davidsonian kind, rescuable out of the wreck of Cartesian-oriented British empiricist or whatever philosophy. The constitutive ideal of rationality controls interpretation. Interpretation is making sense. What's it making sense of? Well, intelligible points of view, something like that. If we succeed in an interpretation of another person, what we've got is a story that we can tell about how things strike this person that hangs together in the relevant sorts of ways. You could start with how things strike this person, rather literally construed, how things look, how things sound. But wrench forms of words like that, so that it includes aspirations and ambitions, desires, whatever. So there's an idea of something like a point of view, which is emphatically and visibly not some kind of descendant of the Cartesian pure ego.
Right.
Because what it exactly is a point of view on the real. It's got to be
Sure.
that what's out there is mostly in view from this
Right.
point of view, because if it weren't so, the procedure of interpretation, by way of which we work ourselves into understanding this point of view, wouldn't have worked. That's the point of the constitutive ideal of rationality, say as applied in the rejection of radically alternative conceptual schemes.
Mm-hmm. Quite right.
So why not say, baby with the bathwater, or something like, it seems to me, defeatism. The Cartesians wrecked the idea of, say, consciousness. The baby with the bathwater move has something like the shape of saying, well, that concept is pretty much gone. I mean, we can have it around the edges, but it's not going to be central to our picture of the kind of thing we are. Acquiescing in the wrecking. But this, I think, authentically Davidsonian conception of a point of view could be put to the service of saying, well, no, I'm not going to let you guys have the concept of consciousness. I'm going to get the concept of consciousness back, so that I'm going to have it as part of my picture of a subject that is an occupant of a point of view, which is a point of view on the real. That he, she is conscious of this, that, or the other thing, as being whichever way it is. I mean, that'll be a way to formulate some of the conclusions about a subject that an interpreter, a Davidsonian interpreter doing properly, authentically Davidsonian interpretation, comes up with. So I don't know why you're so hostile. Hostile... I prefer defeatist.
I'm trying.
I can't do anything with the concept of consciousness. That seems to me to be a defeatist view. It would be better to say, let's rescue it.
Good. I think you've answered the question that's been on my lips as you got into this, which was, we agree about the bathwater, but what's the
Where's
baby?
the baby?
And now, consciousness is the baby. Is that
right?
I mean, I certainly agree with you. Of course, each of us has his own view of the world. I mean, in a perfectly literal sense. We're in different places, and we've had different experiences, and so forth. And what I was insisting on was, it's not as though each of us starts out with or comes to have a bunch of beliefs, and maybe we can figure out what somebody else's are, but they're what they are anyway. Whereas I think, well, all of our beliefs are, to the extent that we can make sense of them, in the public domain. I mean, they're subject matter. I don't mean they're truth, because of course different people believe different things, but their subject matter is in the public domain. Right? Their beliefs are about the same things that my beliefs are about. That's why we can disagree from time to time. And I think, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I was fighting against, the sort of total autonomy of belief. Consciousness, I have said nothing about, and that's only because when I try to think about it, I always bog down. I mean, I'm not sure what there is there to think about, and I don't think I'm throwing it out because I don't know what it is.
Well, I think you proceed as if you do know what it is. You know that it's something like the closest we can get to what the Cartesians thought it was. And you rightly say about that, it can't be foundational to knowledge, the basic point of contact between thought and the world, that kind of thing, as the Cartesians thought it could.
Yes.
That's right. I mean, the consciousness as they conceived it couldn't be foundational to knowledge, couldn't be the basic point of contact between thought and the world, just because they conceived it as such that your consciousness is the way it is anyway, kind of regardless. We can ring the changes on how things are in the real world that surrounds you, and your consciousness is still the way it is. That's hopeless, just because there's nothing in this picture of consciousness that's analogous to the relatedness of, say, words to things in interpretation of language in your picture, right? Okay, so I'm saying you don't actually proceed as if you don't know what consciousness is. You proceed as if you know that all that there is for consciousness to be is that, and that cannot be important in the way that the Cartesians think it is. And that second bit strikes me as dead right. That cannot be important in that way.
But what is it that I clearly understand about consciousness? I would love to know.
Well, that it's a fitting thing about which to say such things as episodes in consciousness cannot stand as foundations to knowledge, or cannot constitute the ultimate point of contact between thought and reality.
You mean such things
So,
as
I think you do talk about what philosophers have wanted to mean by consciousness, and what you tend to do is give an inventory of ways in which Cartesian philosophers have talked about things. Sense data, sensations, the given, sensory stimulations. There are a whole bunch of conceptions of consciousness about which it's perfectly right to say the negative thing that you say about consciousness conceived as exhausted by that kind of list. But what I guess I don't find in these writings of yours that I'm thinking of, I guess the coherence theory paper is one of them. There are a lot of papers in which I think there's something somewhat on these lines said. What I don't find is a kind of willingness to suppose that there might be something else to do with the very idea of consciousness, in which that wouldn't be the right list to start in, right? The given. No, the given is no good. We see that. You're quite right about that. But how about your present visual consciousness of Rudy? That's an item that might be fitted to be part of the truth about your point of view, which is indeed in the public domain. I mean, I need to know a whole lot about you in order to know that. Rudy is visibly present to you.
I see that he's there. I see that he's there. That's, my eyes are playing an essential role in it. But the question in my mind is, do you think that if I say, I see that he's there, that is, I have, as a result of having the kind of optical system I have and a lot of other things, I'm caused to believe that he's there, and furthermore I know that I'm seeing him. Is there? You think the baby has still been left out if I say that, and that's where I become mildly puzzled as to what that extra thing is. And you say, I show that I know what it is, but I didn't buy the exact form of words that you used, where you said a visual or it's in your visual field, or how did you put it?
I can't remember now.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't artfully chosen wording.
Right, but the point is, it was chosen in order to enclose more than just using my eyes and knowing I'm using them. I am led to believe that Rudy is there, and furthermore that his knees are crossed and so forth. But there's more in your view, and I know this. Now we've reached at least one area where we have a difference, not in the sense that there's something that I understand and deny, but rather there's something that you think is there that I haven't mentioned, and I don't know what it is.
I agree. I mean, with that characterization of the stance that you take in your writings, I didn't mean to deny that when I said your posture in your writings is of someone who knows what consciousness is.
Right.
That is, someone who knows that. If consciousness is anything, it's what the Cartesians thought it was, except that they were wrong about its interest or
its
importance.
role. Right. Okay.
So that
even its content.
So that the right thing to say about consciousness is the negative thing. It doesn't have the interest or importance that the Cartesians thought it does, and that's letting them have their specification of it. We might fix on the given, right? What is consciousness? Well, it's the preconceptual given, or something of that sort. I don't know about Cartesians. We're coming a bit unstuck from Descartes, but there's a range of philosophy of which a paradigm case would be someone who thinks. There's the non-conceptual or the preconceptual given. That's what consciousness is. Now that's foundational for belief and knowledge, being onto things conceptually. There's a preconceptual way of being onto things that's the base of it all being conceptually onto things. It's exactly right to say, well, no, if that's what you want to mean by consciousness, it cannot be significant in that kind of way. The thing that I was complaining about the posture that you take in your writings was that, at least implicitly, your drift is something like, and what's more, that's what there is to mean by consciousness. I don't mean that you explicitly say that, but that's the only shape in which the very idea of consciousness as something that might be interesting and important comes up. Consciousness as, let's say, to sum it up, a non-conceptual taking in of the given. And sure, that's epistemologically hopeless. It's hopeless for purposes of thinking about what it is to be conceptually onto things. That's your negative point, and I wholeheartedly concur. But that's it. That's Davidson on consciousness, or Davidson on subjectivity. The negative point is the whole of Davidson on subjectivity. Do not fall into the myth, which is fine. It's very important. We mustn't fall into the myth.
Well, it's more.
But what there isn't is an opening, as it were, to look. The idea of subjectivity, or the idea of consciousness of things, is maybe even so quite a promising idea, which we could get back from the useless, pseudo epistemological mess that philosophers of that kind have made of it.
Well, it happens again and again that people make sense of some notion where it looked hopeless to one or another of us before, and so I'm happy to wait until somebody does this for me. But so far haven't got it. I think there's more to my attack on subjectivism than just this epistemic point. I mean, there's also the point that I don't think we have any use for, or even can make good sense of, the notion of objects before the mind, which are purely individual. And that's a big thing, because because a lot of people believe in that who don't necessarily make the epistemic mistake. And then further, there's the point that insofar as we can understand the contents of another mind at all, they're thinking about the same world we are. So in that sense, the contents of all thought belongs to a public way of thinking. Now, so there's more than just the epistemic point. There are really several other.
I actually meant the sketch of the epistemic point that I gave to include what I think of as something about intentionality or something like that in some really general way.
Right.
I mean, the bad idea that the Cartesians had was that they could make sense of how it is that we're onto things.
Right.
With that conception of consciousness, the conception of consciousness as the given at the base of it all, and it isn't just a point about the uselessness of an epistemology to say no, that's no good. It's a point about the uselessness of a putative approach to the very idea of having thought that's about things, whether it's knowledgeable about them or not. That. I mean, that would be great if it was knowledgeable, but we're not even going to get it to be, vulnerable to the things for whether it's true or not. So to be intelligibly about the things at all, if we think that how thinking basically hooks up with the world is through the given. But
Let me make my own stab at this. I certainly think lots of things go on in our brains, in our minds, perhaps, that is non-linguistic. Dreaming, for example, is fantasizing to some extent. So whether I wouldn't so much call that pre-linguistic as just non-propositional in character. So, and sensations are certainly non-propositional. Tickles and itches, and, pains, and so forth. It would be foolish to deny any of that, and I hope nothing I said about the subjective touched on that sort of thing at all. But when you talk about a non-linguistic or non-propositional way of taking things in, then I begin to not so much say, no, there isn't any such thing, as to say, well, explain, please.
Well, I'll say a useless thing. Kant explained it in the transcendental deduction of the categories. That's a completely useless thing to say, because you look at those pages. But I actually do think that there's already it happened a long time ago. That there was a move in philosophy that replicated the fine negative thing that you do. This will not do. This will not give us an intelligible picture of what it is to be onto things. So that idea of consciousness is useless. Useless for epistemology, useless for understanding intentionality, understanding aboutness. But then I think what's grand about Kant is that he didn't make this throw out the baby or defeatist move. Okay, concept of consciousness is a lost cause. He clawed it back for a purpose that in one way matches what the Cartesians hopelessly thought they could do with their concept. Their concept just wasn't up to the job. That's what you have so beautifully seen a big job. It wasn't up to the job. I think what Kant saw is that another concept of consciousness that's really close to the central conceptual apparatus of Davidsonian interpretation, by working our way into understanding points of view, might be up to the job. It strikes me as in some ways a really small shift to the picture as you see it, so that I'm really tempted to say it still is a Davidsonian picture. To say, look, point of view, it's not a descendant of the Cartesian ego, because it's a point of view onto the real.
Okay.
You've got it that it's rich with beliefs and desires, propositional attitudes. Well, it's more of the same, actually, to add into it such things as your present visual consciousness of Rudy. I'm not putting a proposition in there. Rudy is before your mind. In a way that's unintelligible, except by way of our going on to say, Donald could form thoughts about Rudy, placed as he is with respect to Rudy, were he to form thoughts about Rudy. Now that's a presence to the mind of a non-weird object, not supposed to be intelligible except in the context of your ability to form thoughts, but it isn't itself a matter of your actually forming thoughts. It's a matter of, it connects up with your ability to form thoughts, yes, but he's there for you, whether or not you are stocking your mind with beliefs about him. I think I know that by Davidsonian interpretation, because I know quite a lot about you, and I know which direction your eyes are turned in, and that they function pretty well, because I realize that you don't stumble into furniture, and I know that you're familiar with him. I think I'm just being a Davidsonian interpreter in arriving at this thought.
Well,
that he's present.
But you use a turn of phrase there that I don't understand. I can put various interpretations on it, which are quite different from each other. I can ask myself what the person who is there, whoever it might be, looks like, and now I look, I form various beliefs. Well, it looks something like my uncle, and I see that his hair is done a certain way, and so forth. Those are all beliefs, which I certainly form by looking. Nothing else to it. I can imagine closing my eyes and saying, what does Rudy look like? Or what does the person I just saw look like? These all are beliefs, however. Now, it's the non-belief element that I'm having trouble with. I think I understand what it's like to try to picture somebody that I know in my mind. I think that's not as clear an idea as people make out to be. I'm not whether there's really some image I'm inspecting. I've become very, very suspicious of most of the ways we try to describe this, and so I wouldn't want to put a lot of weight on that sort of thing. But the idea that I can look at Rudy and just take in that Rudy is there without believing it is something I don't even, by even straining, I can't think what that would be like. I can't help but believe he's there.
Well, if you're right, because you're trying to tell yourself a story, right, and you can't do that except discursively.
Right.
But that doesn't seem to squelch this thought that the discursive story that you tell about yourself can include the presence to you of objects that are, as it were, available for you to form beliefs about.
Well, I can certainly think about, I mean, I can imagine there being things that don't exist, but are something like the things that do. Of course. I can entertain propositions in the sense of saying, what would it be like if? And then I imagine that the world is different than I think it is, and ask what follows. I can certainly reason in that way, but I don't think that captures, because what you want to talk about is perception, and you believe that something goes on in perception. There's an additional step, or at least element, which I think I can do without, and furthermore, I don't understand the extra step. I think I do just take in many things, and by that, what I mean.
You mean facts. You mean facts when you say
yes,
things, right?
Yes.
Ways things are.
Yes,
Yeah,
I just
right.
take in. I mean, I look and
proposition
I
shape.
believe. No, but it's all belief. I believe. I mean, sometimes, of course, I look and I wonder, what am I seeing? That's perfectly possible. But at that point, though, I wouldn't say I'm taking in something propositional, or I'd say I am taking in something propositional. It is that there's something that looks a bit like so-and-so and a bit like so-and-so, and I don't know which one it is. So there are propositions sort of floating there, but those are true descriptions of what I'm led or made, I would say, to believe by what I see, by looking. I'm forced into endless beliefs, many of which are so unimportant that they don't matter, and many of which I correct an instant later. And of course, a lot of things that I would be led to believe, if it weren't for other things I know, I'm not led to believe because of what I know. Yeah. But that seems to me to be belief all around. And I don't know what this extra well, let me put it this way. Suppose I'm really just missing something. What difference does it make?
Loss of contact with the great tradition in philosophy. That's the first off thing I'm inclined to say. I mean, I really meant that about Descartes and his followers wrecked the idea of consciousness, and Kant, bless him, saw that the wreck was not irrevocable. He could get it back. You seem to me to be almost, I mean, it's the tiniest shift would have you, because the thing has to be done again for each new generation. You're almost doing again for this generation, where troops of people have fallen back into a roughly Cartesian way of thinking. This is why it was important for you to make the move you made in such papers as the coherence theory paper, the myth of subjectivity. I mean, this wasn't reminding us of some antique thing that we were long since shot of. When we weren't shot of it, we aren't shot of it.
But John, you haven't answered my question.
Well, I meant to, but obviously in a way that's not satisfying. What you miss is failing to be doing this, it seems to me, very satisfying thing that I take Kant to have done. To have said you weren't wrong in thinking that a concept of consciousness could play that role. You were wrong in thinking that what you made of the concept of consciousness could play that role. And that second bit matches the negative move that you make. The throwing out the bathwater move that you make. There's nothing in your thinking that corresponds to the first move, which is Kant saying, as it were, to Descartes and his followers, you were not wrong in thinking that a concept of consciousness could play that role. Here, let me show you what it has to be like to play that role. It's radically unlike the concept of consciousness that you thought could play that role. That's the negative move that
yes.
matches your thinking.
But it seems to me it would be strange to say that here's this important thing that Kant was onto, and that I've left out, but it doesn't make any other difference.
I can't persuade you that, independently of this historical gesture. Let me say one more thing. We've failed to persuade each other on this before. It seemed to me plain that when you were expressing your puzzlement as to what it possibly could be that was, according to me, missing,
the baby.
You were looking at things from your standpoint in the first person. Here am I. What have I got? And I say, well, Rudy, visibly present. If you are trying to, as it were, incorporate that into something that you might tell yourself when you're asking yourself, here am I, what have I got? It's going to have to be, there's Rudy over there, or something like. It's going to have to be some fully fledged belief. Well, I've got that, and then you pass on to some other stuff that you've got, right? So, it's really important for having what I want go missing. That you be correct in thinking that everything that is true about you as, let me say, a Davidsonian subjectivity. This is completely different from a Cartesian subjectivity. Is something that you, as a Davidsonian subjectivity, could, given time and not being thrown by the tediousness of it, rehearse to yourself. Whereas I want to be able to say, even when you are not availing yourself of your capacity to form beliefs about Rudy, there's Rudy over there, or reminding yourself of beliefs that you've got about Rudy, there's Rudy over there. It's true about the Davidsonian subjectivity in two senses, right? The one that's there, the one that I can work my way into an understanding of by Davidsonian interpretation, that Rudy is visibly there for you.
I see that he's there.
Well, but this is you now insisting on doing it from the first person. Is that all right? It's not that I'm cutting loose from the subjectivity. If I say he's visibly there for you, he's in your field of vision.
Yes.
I'm keeping contact with the subjectivity, but I'm not purporting to be giving in my terms something that you could give. Exactly not. It's supposed to be that his there-ness for you is a matter of his availability for you to form beliefs which you can then rehearse to yourself in that kind of way. But the there-ness is the beliefs are only potentially in the there-ness. So of course, when you ask yourself, what have I got? You're not going to come upon the there-ness of Rudy, except in the form of the belief that he's there. Yeah. But why should everything that's true of your subjectivity be such that it's rehearsable by you?
Well, it isn't. It isn't. The question is whether there's something radically wrong with the account of perception that I give. And in your book, you certainly say that there is. In fact, there are two things closely
leaves
related
out
to
this
each
thing.
other. One is, well, you've got this belief on the one hand, and you've got Rudy on the other hand, and you've got this visual apparatus in between, and that's not enough to give any content to the belief, or to give the right content to the belief. And the other thing you say, which is closely related, is I guess I touched really both of them. I mean, one is no content, the other is no friction. But these are almost the same point. Now, you haven't been saying that now. I've been trying to egg you on to say it, because it seems to me that's wrong. I mean, I can give an account of why I'm led to this belief rather than any old belief or no belief. It seems to me there's a pretty good account in terms of how we learn to use sentences like "I see Rudy," or better still, just sentences like "That's Rudy," or "There goes Rudy." We only get control of such concepts or the words that express them in situations in which we're in contact with the various things. I mean, it takes a long time to tell the story. Still, the story does seem like a plausible story about why it is that we mean what we mean when we say "There's Rudy," if that seems to be an account that doesn't involve the baby that's been thrown out. I mean, it's as plausible as any story about ostensive learning, which is pretty simple. But you have been pushing me in that direction. It's as if you want me to see it much more directly.
I've tried this on you before. I'll try it one more time. Philosophers used to talk about chicken sexes, and for all I know, what they said about chicken sexes was false. But there was a myth about what chicken sexes did. I mean, one learned to sex chickens. One picked it up from someone else who could sex chickens. The chickens pass on a conveyor belt before the skilled chicken sexer, who says, "This one's male, this one's female, this one's male." And lo and behold, if you don't kill the males, as I guess they do, I mean, wait and see whether they grow up. They grow up to be roosters. You ask the guy, so they look different, right? And he says, no, they don't look different. I don't have a clue how I'm telling. I just say what I feel like. This one's male, this one's female. And another person can watch. And it's deeply mysterious. One can get the hang of it in the same kind of way that one doesn't say, I see, the males look like this, the females look, one doesn't have a clue how one tells, but one learns to be able to tell. At any rate, that was the myth. And it's supposing that is so about how chicken sexing proceeds. It's puzzling that it works, but it's not. We can't rule it out that it works. I think we could say some somewhat Davidsonian things. I mean, I'm remembering remarks you make about the mere empirical contingency of the particular mechanisms whereby we fetch up, able to speak confidently about the environment. So it's just contingent that when I speak about the visible environment, and somebody says, "You're saying that it's a gerbil because that's the way it looks, right?" I'll say, "Yeah, right. That is why I'm saying it's a gerbil." I won't respond in the way that these perhaps mythical chicken sexers respond, saying, "No, it doesn't look any particular way. I have no clue why I feel like saying what I say. I just feel like saying it." Okay. Now think about the chicken sexes. A way of coming at my sense that there's a baby being thrown out with your bathwater is that it seems to me it ought to be your line, that it could be that all our rock-bottom abilities to speak knowledgeably about how things are in the immediate environment was like that.
No,
Right? It could be that there was nothing nothing there except an inclination to say things that it turns out, if this inclination has been drilled into presence in the right kind of way, issues in the saying of things that are mostly true.
Let me accept it, because I think there must be cases like this. It seems to me I don't see that I have any difficulty with it at all.
I have no difficulty with the chicken sexes, but I think I have no difficulty with the chicken sexes because elsewhere, as it were, they're onto their observable environment in a way that isn't like that. And that's a condition of taking them to be onto anything at all, that they're onto their observable environment in a way that
but
isn't
look,
like that.
I like this.
It couldn't be that somebody could count as being onto the observable environment in a way that was like that across the board. But it seems to me that on your picture it ought to be that it could be that somebody was onto the observable environment in a way that was like that across the board. So the chicken sexes are fine, we take them in stride.
Yeah.
Because, if he backtracks and says, well, at least it's a chick,
Yeah.
and you say that because it looks like a chick, right? He's going to say, yeah, right, it looks like a chick. Mm-hmm. It isn't that he has no idea why he feels like saying it's a chick. He feels like saying it's a chick because that's the way it looks. Whereas he feels like saying it's male, he has no idea why he feels like saying it's male.
Yeah. But John, it's not any part of my view at all that a person shall always, or even ever, be able to say what it is about what he sees that makes him say what he says. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But even if you could never do it, it wouldn't interfere with my view, which is we.
That's my point. That's the baby. It seems to me unintelligible that it should be like the chicken sexes all over.
Well, the reason I don't see. Well, look, it all depends. There are all kinds of things that I come to believe just by looking. I mean that the electrons are thicker over there than they are over there, or something like that. I believe just by looking, although I can't see an electron. Yeah. Now, if you ask me, what is it that I see that reveals that to me? Either I don't give you any story at all, or I give you a sort of song and dance about electrons and so forth, all the background stuff. In the same way, if you ask, how do I know there's a difference between an undetached chicken part and a chicken, the answer is going to go by way of knowing about parts and the notion of detachment and a lot of stuff like that. So it's bound to be the case that sometimes when we're led to believe something by just looking, there's an account that we can give in terms of what we see. And there isn't bound to be, though, in every case, because in the end, we learn that this is the thing to say now, right? When somebody else says it, actually. Right. It comes later, so to speak, that we can explain what it is about what we see that might have led us to that. But I mean, we can pick out a person from a background long before we can describe anything about the scene and so forth. So I'm not troubled by the fact that this could, if we had extremely primitive vocabulary and set of concepts, that all of them would be so that we couldn't explain what it is that we're seeing that leads us to believe. I don't. The thing is, there's such a tremendous number of things that we're led to believe by what we see. And if there weren't, it's not clear whether it would be thought, because it has to have a great deal of complexity really to be the real thing.
Yeah. I guess I knew you weren't troubled. I actually have a question about a slightly different area. When you argue against the idea of communal norms of language, the main point, I think, is one that can be summed up by talking about ideas like the idea of speaking as the educated do or as the rich do. You, I know, cringe when people say what the data shows is, but you don't think that this cringe, cringe reaction is reflective of something deep. I mean, something that gets at the essence of meaning as such, or the essence of communication as such. And that strikes me as dead right. I mean, people who start in aiming to tell stories about the essence of meaning, and then it turns out that what they're talking about is it's wrong to use data as a singular. Well, you know, that's hopeless. I mean, that can't have anything to do with the serious, the deep question about how is it that language has anything to do with reality at all. How is it that we're talking about how things are when we talk? So that's prefatory. I want to say dead right. Sure, if that's what people are going to want to mean by it's got to be shared norms. You know, I'm with you in wanting no truck with that. But now I want to know if you feel any sense of a need to respond to some question with this shape. Go back to the constitutive ideal of rationality. It's substantive. It's a substantive conception of what's a reason for what. And it's part of the point that we've got a big fat one, and we can understand someone else's only insofar as we can, to an approximation, find ours in this other person. Well, how do we get ours? And maybe it ought to be, how do I get mine? Or how did I get mine? That strikes me as a question that it oughtn't to be impossible to ask. I mean, for instance, it isn't just that maturation as the kind of animal that I am took care of it, as it took care of, at a certain age, facial hair sprouted, underarm hair, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't just come with, in that way, growing up. I mean, the genes take care of it.
What rationality?
Right. Acquiring a sense of what's a reason for what, the determinate substantive sense of what's a reason for what, armed with which I set out to make sense of others. Now, there seems to me to be some plausibility. Right? I've got a question hanging. I mean, do you
right.
think that there ought to be an answer to that question? Maybe I should pause and let you answer that.
Well, I think if we have thoughts at all,
Mm-hmm.
We necessarily have knowledge of what
Sure.
kind of thing is a reason, because that's part of what it is to have a certain thought, is that certain other things are reasons for it.
But how does that? I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's a way of putting the basic picture of the idea of thought as having its home in the context of this
Right.
conception of interpretation.
Right.
Sure, make intelligible to me that this rather large idea, it turns out, which includes being right about things mostly,
and wrong,
and being right about how things are mostly, being right about what's a reason for what mostly, it gets a grip on human individuals at all. And this is a point at which I think a different kind of invocation of the idea of something shared has some sort of plausibility to it.
Look.
There has to be a tribe with the old guys who are the repository of the tribe's memory.
Yes,
there has to be some machinery for accumulation of wisdom about how things are and what's a reason for what.
Well,
so that the newcomer taps into that, and I think it's really hard to make sense of how there could be the elders who are the repository of the tribal memory, or our analog to that, which I guess is the Library of Congress or something like that. If it were true that every interpretative encounter was in principle a clean start, right?
Well, John, there are two different points here, it seems to me. I would put, I mean, from a cultural point of view, understanding real people in the real world, the tradition makes an enormous difference. Whether, though, we have to have any more tradition than is just born by understanding a language, I'm not sure. It's good to have it. I mean, we wouldn't dream of doing without it.
Might that be a language in the sense that you're skeptical of?
No.
Okay.
That's the point. Having a language means being not just being able, but actually communicating with other people. What I deny is that we have to mean the same thing by the same words in order to do that. And there I don't see what the argument is, that we would lose track of all this wisdom if we spoke differently from another person, as long as we were understood. The aim of talking is to be understood. That's my view. We don't owe anything to the language as in the abstract, whereas Michael Dummett thinks we do actually owe an obligation to the going way of saying things. I think we owe lots of obligations to our neighbors, to be friendly and to be easy to understand in certain situations and so forth. But those are not obligations to language. Those are obligations that we meet by using language which is understood. So I think the obligation, those obligations are all derivative so far as language is concerned. And so there are two questions. One is, could we be understood if we talked as others do? The answer is yes, because we are. That we don't lose the tradition, because the tradition has to do with the concepts, not with the words. I mean, the wisdom isn't built into the words, it's just built